not unusual, by the way, for partners to, I've had one where they bought several pieces of rental property, and they owned those. They were all in one of the parties' names, but they worked on them together. And we alleged successfully in that case an oral partnership. The one I just got through with, there were two businesses that brought in a couple $1 million a year, but they were all in one of the parties' names. And we tried to allege an oral partnership there, and we didn't succeed. But that's what you need to do. So it's it's a fascinating area of law. It's very challenging. If you get into litigation, it's very tiring too. Yeah, and you have to be creative.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Mr. Cole. Your focus is on adoption and reproductive issues. What are the regulations? I know nothing about adoption, so I don't know if there's any differences at all between a hetero couple, such as myself and my husband, or a different couple, either lesbian couple or a male gay couple, that would like to go through the adoption process in Texas. I don't know the difference between an open adoption and a closed adoption, so maybe we could get a little bit of background on that. And then, are there any extra hardships or hurdles that an LGBT couple would have to go through that a hetero couple doesn't necessarily have to deal with to adopt a newborn?
Okay. Generally family building will sort of fall into about 4 categories, and this is sort of what we do, just sort of the repeating business that we do. It's going to be assisted reproduction. It's going to be domestic infant adoption. It's going to be adoption through Child Protective Services, and then international adoption. So these are about the 4 places that 99% of the business is going to go. Assisted reproduction, in family building. Assisted reproduction, domestic infant, CPS, international. And I'll just quickly hit on each one of them. Assisted reproduction is utilization of donor egg or donor sperm. It's utilization of a gestational carrier, which is a woman who is carrying a child that is unrelated to her, or traditional surrogacy, which is a woman who is carrying a child who is related to the carrier. We have in Texas a donor, if you file the right consents, do the right upfront work, a donor does not have parental rights to the child. So donor sperm, donor egg, those individuals who donate do not have parental rights to the child. A gestational carrier, if we have a gestational agreement, it's prepared correctly, and then the couple can go through a validation proceeding where when she delivers a child, then the couple can have their names placed directly on the birth certificate of the child that she delivered. Our state has limited that protocol to heterosexual couples, married couples, and we have had the bill come up the last 2 sessions, which would extend it to single individuals. That's about as far as our legislature goes with respect to recognizing a same-sex relationship, and it's been shot down twice. But the first time it didn't get out of committee, the second time it got through the Senate but not the House. We think it's going to go all the way through the 3rd time, and when it goes through the 3rd time, then I think that the validation process for a gestational carrier will be extended to a single person. So there are some barriers for same-sex couples in assisted reproduction, but that's where most of the business is. That's where most of the business is moving towards assisted reproduction, because there are barriers to adoption as well. In domestic infant adoption, it requires a termination of the mother's rights. It requires a termination of the father's rights. It requires a home study. It requires criminal clearance on the prospective adoptive parents. It requires review of health and genetic information on the birth parents.
How long does that take?
It depends on, if we're talking about you're applying, let's say a couple is applying through an adoption agency. The application process and the home study process probably could take several months, and then you may wait for a period of time prior to being matched to a girl. There are not limitations that are placed, except in the state of Florida. There are not limitations that are placed on a person adopting by sexual orientation. In Florida, you have to fill out a form, and you got to check off the checkoff box what your sexual orientation is. And if you're homosexual, then you can't adopt in that state. But that's the only state it still happens in that state. But there's not a barrier by sexual orientation to adoption, but in domestic infant adoption, there are barriers from the sense that who is the girl who is placing her child for adoption? She's not the cheerleader and the football quarterback's baby. It's a girl who's 22 or 23 years old. She's parenting another child. She's undereducated. She's underemployed. She's having a difficult time making it work, and she has a picture. She becomes pregnant, and she is in a crisis. She has an idea in her head about what she wants for her child, and it tends to be this very traditional-looking married couple. He's young, she's young, she stays at home. They have a nice house, a lab in the backyard. White picket fence. She has an idea about that. That's a barrier to same-sex couples. There are agencies. There's a very good agency in Houston. There's a very good agency in Atlanta that specializes in recruiting same-sex couples and placing infants in same-sex homes.
So these mothers, they get to hand-pick, basically. They go through
Yeah.
files and look. There aren't adoptions that you're just giving your baby up for adoption. Who checks, that's a different category that you're
There's
gonna.
no such thing, really.
Oh.
Unless CPS. I mean, if you go through Child Protective Services, that's an involuntary process. So that's, the state has stepped into your home, they've removed a child from you, and then they have placed that child in foster care, typically over your objection. There's a legal process that is generally could take a year or up to 18 months, where the rights of the parents are adjudicated, and there's an analysis about whether there needs to be an involuntary termination or whether that child needs to be moved to a relative. And but if at the end of the process parental rights are terminated, then that child is eligible for adoption. That child is about 75% of the time adopted by his or her foster parents, and his or her foster parents may be a same-sex couple. And in fact, I think more of the adoption work with same-sex couples is in Child Protective Services. There are not barriers.
Foster parents as a couple.
There are not barriers to being licensed for foster care if you are a same-sex couple. Internationally, there's not much happening internationally for anybody. And there are receiving countries and there are sending countries, and the receiving countries are Canada and the United States and Western Europe and Israel. And the sending countries are Central and South America, Africa, and the Pacific Rim, India, Pakistan, Thailand, Philippines. Many of those countries have out and out, they'll have a barrier. You must be a married couple to adopt. There are countries that allow single people to adopt, and if a same-sex couple then sort of designates one who's going to move forward in the adoption, I have seen those adoptions go through. But last year, I think we're down to 10,000 international adoptions a year across the whole country. It's way down.
So if you've got a gay couple or a gay client that comes to your office, they've been legally married in New York, and they were recently transferred to Texas. One partner has a biological child, and that she wants her partner to legally adopt.
Okay.
In addition, they're interested in one of the partners giving birth again. They're exploring artificial insemination to do that.
All right.
And having the other woman eventually established as the other legal parent. Is that possible? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, the first question would be with the woman who has previously delivered a child. The first question is, who's the dad?
Okay.
If the father is a man, formally married to a man, or there's an identifiable biological father who is not a donor, then that man's rights would have to be terminated. Likely, he would have to consent to that adoption. If he consents to a termination of his parental rights, then now we've got one woman who is the biological mother, and then her partner is wanting to adopt. So let's hold that situation for a second. Then on the assisted reproduction matter, let's say that the other woman is interested in carrying a child to term, and they're asking